Hello and thank you for tuning in to Stampscaping 101. I did this scene yesterday, which was kind of my Castaway scene in the theme of stormy weather. And I don't know, I thought it told somewhat of a story, but it was, of course, incomplete. So I'm doing this kind of not Gulliver's Travels, but Robinson Crusoe type of thing. Okay, so kind of I wanted to do a spread now, kind of a beginning spread, kind of a ship heading off into the new world, foggy terrain. I was using this one as inspiration, kind of a, look at that, matches right up here, but I wanted to do it with a different image that I had with the 100 proof press, row of houses here. That's the name of the stamp company, and a fistful of stamps. Ship again. All the names of the stamps will be in the notes section below this video. If you click on the show more, it'll go into the media and everything that's been used and the stamps used. But used my large Seaside Cove stamp on here, and as far as the, I don't know, I guess the foundational piece in here, and gave it, you know, that an overall gray scale color scheme with the London fog, and then I go into the different blues down for the water, and then I go into my rocks with a little bit more of a warm tone type of a color scheme, kind of a rusty color scheme to give it a little bit of contrast between the cool sea. And I don't know, just a lot of little gel pen accents within this space down here. And we get this ship kind of positioned on the left side of the scene, kind of because in the Western cultures we read from left to right, so I kind of position this one right here. And in the next sequence, you know, here it is kind of tipping over to the right. You know, if I knew I was going to do a 3-panel type of thing, maybe I would have positioned it a little bit more in the center. And then I might use it again, kind of tipped over in like a tropical lagoon or something like that, you know, kind of where you can just see a little bit of a piece of it. And I thought that would be kind of a nice sequence as far as a continuity of imagery, but just shown in a different way. And anyways, this is the center panel. Really enjoyed doing this one. I wanted to do another kind of real foggy looking scene based on this composition right here, which I felt looked a little incomplete, but it was a good study in terms of how to transition an image into kind of obscurity with lighter tones of inks and a lot of pigment, white pigment ink applied in there. And same thing right here, transitioning the Seaside Cove from really defined foreground shapes and spaces and imagery into kind of more of a lighter obscured imagery, I guess, lighter value imagery. Okay, so that's what I kind of wanted to happen here. You can see the horizon line in there, and I might add a little bit more of a white pigment ink out there to obscure, you know, the transition between sky and surface, but I'm not sure. Anyway, if you choose to watch this, I hope you enjoy it, and I'll be doing the third in a 3-piece series on the elongated half-page letter-sized piece of paper in the next video, so looking forward to doing that one, and to kind of conclude my triptych piece here on Castaway. Thanks for watching. Okay, we are almost through with the compositional part of this scene. I just kind of pre-stamped it here a little bit ahead of time. It's using the Seaside Cove, the larger one, on a half-size piece of paper. Okay, it's the 11" by 4 1/4, and I have used the rocky Waterside left and right But where the right side is a mirror image of the left side, what I've done is I've masked off some of the trees, or all of the trees. Actually, I didn't stamp them out. I just colored up just the rocky waterside part, and I left the trees uncolored. Okay. Then I stamped them out here, and then I've placed this stamp from 100 Proof Press right on top of it, like so. I just eyeballed it. I just kind of looked for this point and this point, and I made sure that that point right there was resting on top of the waterside. So I just kind of got real low, checked it out, and just stamped it right on top there. And that fit really well. And my last part of the, I use this ledge right here in the foreground just to give us kind of somewhat of a vantage point looking out into the scene. And I just have my tall ship to place within the scene. I thought I'd do it roughly about so. I was trying to, the only thing that I have to really reference as far as scale goes are these houses here. And this ship has to be, I mean, if I put it down here, it would be saying that this is a really small ship, but from the number of sails, it's probably a pretty large one as far as those times went. And this was by a Fistful of Stamps. And I'll place it about right here. I'm placing it to the left side just in terms of the sequences in this three-part series. I want it to be, this is the first scene, I want it to be on the left side because kind of in Western culture we read from left to right, so I'm placing this here representing a beginning, and it'll be going out that way. Okay, the second piece was this one right here, and here it is toppled over like that. So I'll put it about like so. Now I've kind of obscured the top portion of the Seaside Cove up here because I want this to be kind of heading off into the you know, the foggy kind of unknown. So this recent scene that I've done in a previous video is going to be my kind of study or reference for this scene. So that worked out really well. I wasn't planning on doing this scene, but I did that last kind of Robinson Crusoe Castaway type of scene, and I thought, well, you know, this will fit really well with kind of the theme and in context of that previous video of the foggy shore. Okay, now on this stamp right here, I'm taking off some of the ink because I want some of it to be, well, a lot of it to be, you know, somewhat obscure as it heads off into the fog. I don't want there to be too much contrast, so obscuring some of it by removing quite a bit of the ink, and I'll remove quite a bit of the ink from the base of it, and we'll place it, let's say roughly about like so, heading off into the great unknown, unforeseen tragedy taking place. Okay, something like that. So you can see where I've removed some of the ink, kind of giving it a little bit of lighting direction, and just so some of the image is a little bit grayer than others, representing kind of a foggy environment. Okay. All right. Now for the coloring. In this scene right here, I really started with a lot of gray tones in the sky and in the water, and then I hit the water area with some more brighter, but still not too bright, blues, and I hit the sides with some different warm tones. But let's go with kind of a Memento London Fog to kind of set the mood and overall kind of color scheme of the piece. Yeah, maybe not so much color scheme, but definitely the lighting scheme and kind of the lack of kind of a high. I really need to clean off my desk here. I've done a lot of videos and I have a ton of media piled up and stamps. Okay, so it's kind of setting the mood for this kind of murky, foggy environment, and I like that from a thematic standpoint of you know, this ship sailing off into the great unknown. All right, and I don't know, maybe this is coming from England or some, you know, foggy UK maybe, or something like that. Kind of looks like a, you know, old English houses maybe. Okay, so bringing in some tone, and I'll bring in more than I usually do. Okay, this tip feels weird. Yeah, this tip is a little ripped right here. These are a lot of my old demo tips from workshops and make and takes and whatnot. I just spun it around so it wouldn't catch. But these tips should last you a long time, provided you use them in the kind of the correct application. You don't want to scrub back and forth onto a dry piece of paper. And see how I'm applying this ink right here. I'm doing it in a concentrated area. Alright. Most people, if they have troubles with these, they try to do the whole thing. They go like this, you know, and they're going all over the place, you know, trying to do like vast areas of tone. And that's not what you want to do. You want to kind of work small areas, okay, like this. And you want to move that ink around and get a nice transition of whatever hue you're working in. Right? And that way, you're working in kind of a, somewhat of a puddle of ink, you might say. It doesn't read as a puddle. I mean, it's not like you're pouring ink out onto the surface, but you're just kind of lightly bringing this in. I'm just touching the page too. And see, I'm staying in an area, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 glides like that. Okay? Depends how wet your pads are, you know, as far as how many times you kind of streak it on there, but the wetter the pad, the less re-inking you have to do. The more ink gets applied to your page, it's easier to kind of spread out like that too, okay? The more absorbent your paper is, you just kind of stay in an area longer. So you get more of that, more of a kind of a saturation of the ink, that is. Okay, really kind of filling this in. Like I said, normally I kind of, you know, leave a little bit of a lighter area, and I'll leave, you know, a little bit of a lighter area, but not too much. Because I want the tones, the values kind of muted. But, that being said, you still want some variation to occur. You don't want everything just mono value. So when it comes to things like water, you want it a little bit reflective and you want there to be some sort of variation on here. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of streak some color in, and I'll maybe leave the white area coming off the top of the waves a little bit lighter. But just in general, I mean, I don't have to really search it really hard. I'm just going to leave, you know, little streaks of lightness in there just by not coloring it out. Okay. There, so this grayscale is almost done. Easy to do. Just don't do it all, and you'll have variation. Concentrate your colors like this, your applications, and you'll get a nice smooth transition. Okay, you're kind of super saturating your page too in some form. You're getting a lot on the surface, but the pulp of the page is really kind of absorbing a lot of that ink. And the other colors to come will kind of float a little bit more on the surface of the page. Now I'm finding these mementos, when they dry on glossy, I'm using a King James cast coat. Everything dries really, really dull looking to me. I don't know, it could be my paper, but the spray sealing of your scenes afterwards, for me, really kind of helps the overall. Otherwise it's a little bit too really kind of dull looking as far as the finish goes. It doesn't look the same as a kind of a freshly inked stamp scene, you know, when everything's still a little wet and the colors are really vibrant. You don't lose those so much if you know, even if it dulls out. If you spray seal it, it'll bring back the intensity and contrast of the colors. So it's the great equalizer for different papers, you know. Not all papers are created the same, media, everything, but you can kind of even things out with a little bit of spray sealant. Alright, so this is quite a decent coating of that, but don't worry, you won't be doing that same application with every color that you use. Alright, switching up to Summer Sky. This is one of those colors that I do want to get a inker for. I use Summer Sky quite a bit. Alright, I can barely see anything happening here with the Summer Sky. It's a slightly cooler gray now that I'm using it over my grayscale. Okay, bringing it for the most part into sky and sea. I'll bring some over my rocks a little bit. Still kind of staying with my streaking here and retaining some of the light areas down here within the surface of the water, just for some nice variation so everything isn't mono value. Okay, so it's important to kind of watch what you're doing, especially when you're moving into your darker tones. Okay, I'm still with a very light tone right now, but I'm still being careful not to tone everything out. Alright, what we do is we just move kind of incrementally through, or we move kind of methodically, I should say, through incrementally darker tones, okay, darker values. Alright, so this is a salvia blue. If you didn't have that, I'd just go right to the Bahama blue, kind of a medium tone. This one here is a little bit darker than Summer Sky, so I can see it a little bit right there. Okay, so that's a little bit different than over here, right? Not that I want to get everything really bright blue or anything like that, especially in the kind of the more distant areas, visually distant, okay, or representationally distant, whatever. Or here you go. On the composition, it usually means that it's farther back in the distance. Okay, and again, bringing it down onto my water surface. It's kind of one of those things where maybe you can't really tell where kind of the sky ends and the the land begins because of the foggy setting that we're looking at. Now this card up here is, I don't know, do we call this a card when it's a half-page scene? The scene is kind of wet right now, so this salvia blue ink that I'm using right now isn't applying onto the scene as dark as it would if this paper was just dry. It was the first color ink I was using. It would apply darker because it would be getting absorbed into the paper faster. Okay, so we have that. Alright, let's give the scene just a touch of a horizon, okay? Or maybe a little bit. Okay, I won't apply too much. Maybe not with the darker tones. Uh-oh. Someone's mowing the lawn across the street. Okay, let's see here. Alright, so I've masked that off. Okay, and I have this kind of upside down because I can reach the scene. Let me do a quick measurement here. I'll just, let's see. I just want to make sure this piece of paper is running. Oops. I want it straight. Okay, I'm just doing a quick basic measurement. It's straight enough. It's maybe a touch up. Okay, so this is my mask. It's the easiest mask you'll ever do in stamping. Just a piece of paper, and I'm giving the horizon line just a touch more ink. Okay, like so. Alright, so there's my horizon. It's a lot more defined, but, not too hard, crisply defined. I'll obscure it a little bit more by bringing in some more of this tone into the sky area, decreasing the contrast between that horizon and the background. So after I see what it looks like, what I do is I just kind of go back into it and kind of refine it a little bit more. I can bring more of this into the water as well. But I think that looks pretty good. Okay, it's deepening a little bit. As the base layer coats get a little drier, you're able to apply a little bit deeper of a saturation with the darker colors. Not that I'm going to wait for things to dry, but as things set up a touch, you can just tell, you can feel it. Things kind of apply a little bit faster. So it's not that it's a precarious thing when it gets drier. You know, it's just, you know, at that time it's good because you know, you got a feel for the application and how things are turning out, and sometimes you're ready for it to be a little bit more accepting of the inks. Okay, let's see. Let's obscure it a little bit more. Let's knock down some of those tones, some of those values. Okay. That looks about right. Alright, now what's going through my mind is I'm wondering if it was time to start doing the rocks. I think I'll bring in some desert sand into it. Some warmer tones. I'll use maybe some distress inks. Some of those warm tones, like what are some of those colors I use? Like antique linen, maybe. Alright, I really need to clean off my desk here. I can't even find my... There we go. Walnut stain. And tea dye. Can't find my own pads, and if you're watching this, you're a stamp or two and you know what I'm talking about. As far as the way our desks look, you know, or whatever our tables, surfaces that we're working on look like, after you do, like, I don't know, it only takes like one project. Alright, adding some warm tones. I can add that on some of the houses as well. I don't think they'd be like wood panel, they'd be stucco, or I don't know what whatever people use as far as building materials go, but I can give it a little bit of a warm tone to it, maybe. Okay, hitting some of this foreground ledge. So it's just a little bit of a warmth. It's a good base layer color. Alright, let's try some walnut stain. I'll try to hit some more of the deeper shadows with some other tones. Okay. Now these rocks down here do have a base layer of blue, so it'll have a cool base layer with an over coating of warmth. So you can do that. A lot of times you can put warmth under cool or cool under warmth for a little bit of a variation in temperature. And that's always kind of nice to explore. Temperatures. Okay, let me see here. Let's add a little bit of orchid. I think I used some of that in my rocks here, and I liked that. I didn't want it too purplish, but having a tinge of kind of that color like that is kind of nice. Okay. I'm going to keep the rocks and the hue of that, I think, yeah, somewhat separate from the water. A lot of times I bring the colors of that into the water and the colors of the water into that, which I did, so we'll just do it one way. We won't bring in so much of the other colors into it. Now, one of the things that color that I don't think I used on this scene was brown, which is one of my favorite Marvy colors. Okay, here we go. And we'll test that out here. I'm just using the same applicator without cleaning it. You know, because it does create kind of a intermediate color between the color that you just used and the one that you're going to use. By not cleaning it off, you'll have some of that color still in there, creating that fusion, which kind of creates a nice in-between color for a few, you know, applications of it. And then eventually, this previous color will all be gone, then you'll just be using pure, you know, whatever that you're using. In this case, brown. So that's how the colors get blended really easy and with continuity. Okay. Getting there as far as kind of achieving, you know, a certain degree of depth within the scene. Let's hit the foreground a little bit more. I do want this scene to be really foggy, but the imagery in the foreground will be a lot more kind of crisp in terms of the lighting and contrast within that space. This is just a dark brown I'm using now to kind of heighten, darken some of the shadows. Okay, getting there a little bit at a time. You're just kind of moving things along rather incrementally, and your scenes will be nice and rich as far as your color applications go if you give them a chance to kind of really develop as far as the shadows go, and thus the lighting, because, you know, the shadows define the light. Dark defines light, and light defines dark. So contrast, okay? Let's do something. Let's go a little bit more. Let's go a little bit more violet. I don't want it too violet. Oh, I need to replace my pale violet. My pad crumbled a couple scenes ago, right on camera. But it was a really old pad. All of my pads are really old. This is a deep lilac. This one's not quite as old because the deep lilac came out after the original, I think, 30 pads, Marvy Matchimals. I'm okay with a pad kind of giving out after 20 years of service. I'd say that's a pretty long time for any type of media. Let's see, what color is that? Oh, that's pretty violet. Kind of pale violet. Alright. So there's our rocks. And I'll hit them a little bit more with some additional tones. Let's see. Okay, there's my blue. I was using some Prussian blue on a scene. I was adding a little bit, refining this, or seeing if I could. It's really, really dark. Okay, let's see if I can add in some of this Bahama blue. I'm not even going to bother cleaning this off. Gosh, there's a lot of ink in there. That is, maybe I'll squeeze some of that out. These tips here basically turn into a pad, ink pad on a stick. You know, when you ink them up, you know, there's sponges filled with ink. You know, and that's what, you know, this is. It's basically, well, it's fabric there, but it's filled with ink. So, they can hold a lot of ink at times. Keep that in mind. Even though sometimes when you're dabbing into it, it doesn't seem like there's not a lot on there, because, you know, these are sponges, so, you know, when you start applying them onto your scenes, you're not applying a full saturation. A lot of times it's a very light version of it, unless you squeeze it out, you know, which you don't want to do as far as the technique goes. Okay, just kind of streaking this in the shadow areas of the design. You can see where there's some darker areas. And I'm hitting that, but I'm hitting it very lightly. Okay, use a really light touch. Just streak it in very gently like that. Okay. When people go like this, it's harder to control than this, okay? It's like you're building up, like, think of it as if you're kind of building up like little powder coat amounts of something, okay? And that's what you want. Or imagine you're kind of applying some, I don't know, makeup on like a child's face or something like that for a play they're in, or, you know, something like that. Okay, don't go too, you know, just gently apply it, and just a little bit at a time. You can always go with more strokes, okay? But that is always better than trying to be hurried. And if you get kind of an unintentional kind of a mark, our result, you can always kind of blend it out, but it's just, you know, it usually takes up a lot more time trying to blend something out than just take the time just to avoid, you know, getting that in the first place. Alright, so there we go so far. Kind of defining that a little bit more. This area in here is much more defined in terms of, you know, the values achieved. So you have to kind of do the same thing in other objects, you know, be it the subject matter or whatever. Now in this case, my kind of focal point is supposed to be off in the distance, so it's not going to be rendered very much. I want it to be kind of obscured, you know, again representing, you know, something going off into the unknown. So I'll just kind of leave that one as is, but basically my point is you gotta kind of have to render things with a similar finish to give everything kind of that feeling of continuity, okay? Alright. I'll use a little bit of this for the shadow from that boat. Kind of gives a little bit more of a on the surface, in this, you know, surface type of feel by applying a little bit of a shadow to it. It kind of becomes an anchoring shadow that we'll try to establish. Alright, Bahama Blue. Shall we go to a even darker blue? Maybe we'll go with the Danube Blue. If you have Marvy's, go with the number 3 blue. Maybe I'll use both, I'm not sure. We'll see what's needed as we go along. Okay. Danube Blue. Okay. What happens is I get a little bit more selective as far as my application goes with darker tones. You usually use a lot more of the lighter tones, and as you move through the value scale of your scene, you use less and less of those colors. You know, the darker tones tend to, you know, be used for smaller areas, shadows, detailed areas, whatnot. Okay. Alright, let's try some of this number 3 blue. Marvy inks are a little bit thinner, so sometimes I get a darker result. But again, I don't want it everywhere. I just want it, in this case, in my shadow areas. Okay. Alright, so there we go. See, I've left my kind of spindrift just as is. Maybe I can bring in a little bit more tone up here. Very lightly though. Even though I'm working with a pretty dark blue, I can just kind of apply a very faint, pale version of it just by using the drier version of it, and by lightly applying it with my applicator. Okay, I'm just gently touching the page with it and with a dry tip at that. Okay, that way you get lighter values of that. Okay, now let's use some additional value in the form of black. Okay, images were stamped out in black, so I'm going to hit my shadows with some additional black, but it'll be more of a gray, okay, because I'll be using it very lightly and in just some select areas. So I'm applying black ink, but it's really, you're applying gray, okay? And that's where you get a lot of the control. If we got just stark black applications, that would be really hard to control, and it would be much more kind of a spontaneous looking result and process, okay? Kind of the more methodical you can be, the more control you have over it. Not that that's the way it has to be. You can do more kind of a spontaneous look for a very gestural result, but if you want control, then just take it nice and slowly and work it into your technique, okay? Not that it has to be one way or the other either. You can do things very spontaneous in one area of your scene and, you know, have it much more controlled in another if you want to. Just by the rate at which you apply your media. Okay, I'm kind of going into my rocky waterside and giving those areas a little bit more tone and shade, and what I'm doing is I'm just referencing the image itself, and I'm seeing where the shadows are. And I'm going in, and I'm just adding more of that to that area. You see the difference between that rock over here and this one? There are these kind of defining kind of contour within that image, and I'm just kind of following that again with some additional tone, like a grayscale tone, using the black. Alright, now I can see where the houses here are creating a little bit of a shadow, and the shadow is in the image itself, so I'm just going and reiterating that with some additional tone. I can put a little bit more shading at the base of this rock. I think that'll set it into the scene a little bit more and kind of anchor it. Adding in some variation on that rock. Okay. You just have to kind of be willing to kind of differentiate areas within a given space or form, and that will make the objects seem a little bit more dimensional. It gives them weight and opacity. I'm starting to get kind of defined here in terms of my foreground, but in this one too, it was supposed to be very defined in the foreground, and as it moves off, you hit that fog, so maybe I'll still be getting that here. But I think I'm going to have to apply quite a bit of pigment ink up there. We'll see how it goes. I'm just having so much fun kind of defining these forms right here. Maybe taking it a little bit more than I thought I would in terms of the definition of forms, but I don't know. I'm always doing that, so it's kind of going against my nature to kind of, have things a lot more subdued and undefined, and without kind of much of a range and contrast, and I like to make things look rounder and more three-dimensional, not real muted and obscured. So I guess it's going against my norm a little bit with these super foggy scenes. Okay. Alright, maybe we'll stop right there and start bringing in some additional effects. Okay. Alright, so effects could mean a lot of things, but I'll bring in some shadows, okay, and I'll grab some different pens here, kind of within the same color scheme that we've been using so far, okay? So these are alcohol pens. These ones are just the Marvy Le Plume Permanents, okay? But you see how there's, we have a nice range of values here, including some very light values, and that's what I really like, when I'm starting off and, my tones, I'm starting very lightly, and then I work incrementally darker. And that's what I like to do when I'm switching media like this too. Okay. I like to kind of have a lot of control over what I'm doing. So I'll start very light where you really can't see very much of a change that's occurring when you're using it, okay? And then you can get more defined as you go, but this pen right here kind of brought a little bit, you can see the difference between that rock and over here. It's pretty subtle, but it is adding in an extra layer of transparent color, okay? Now be careful not to just lose all of your nice lighting, in terms of having some things lighter and some things darker. But for the most part, I can kind of take this and I can add it into my darker areas just to add in another layer of, hopefully, rich, transparent colors. Okay? And these alcohol pens won't blend or smear. They shouldn't smear your what you've already laid down. Sometimes there's some black inks that kind of have a little bit more of a kind of a chalky surface, and you might pick up a little bit of that, but I think in general it'll be okay. Okay, so I'm kind of bringing in some of this This was biscuit. This one's camel. Okay, so a little bit more of some brighter tones in here. And the blues that I brought out, blue values, I can bring in some little streaks here and there into my water maybe, and it's very light blue. Okay. If I want to hit my shadows a little bit more in some areas that are very difficult to get to with the Stylus tool, I can use something like this to go in here and define the forms a little bit more with something that's more conducive for that type of mark. This one's azure. Hitting some of these little rocks in here, putting a shadow behind them, some of these really tiny ones. But I can do that with something like this, you know, a little brush marker. And hit a few streaks into my water. Kind of going on the underside of the these little waves here, foreground waves with a little bit of this. Okay, this is more of a kind of a little bit of a violet. Maybe I can bring some of this into some of the houses, or you know, some of the rocks here, because remember we did use some of that violet. Okay, and bring some down in this water. Really barely shows that, but in my mind it might be adding a little bit of a tone to things, you know. Okay, let's see, what is this? Cool gray number 3. Define all of your objects within the scene. You know, don't leave something's, you know, rendered as far as volumes and forms and opacity, and then leave something else kind of untouched, you know. Kind of bring that continuity to your scene, unless you're doing it for some kind of, you know, visual statement of having something stand out more than others. Okay, I'm hitting some of these rocks in here. This is a sepia. Hitting some of the shadow areas. Rocks out in the water. Okay. Here's a lighter one. Beige. Ooh, almost invisible. I use my lighter ones kind of within a given color family as my blending tools. Or blender pens, I guess I should say. Alright, so there we go. Let's far as the coloring goes, I think we've achieved a decent amount of contrast and definitely saturation within the given objects and spaces. Okay, waves, everything like that. Let me go with this one right here. This is a cool gray number 5. Looks like as it gets darker, the numbers get higher. Okay, so let me go for some of these rocks in the water. Yeah, it's a little bit darker, so I can get a little bit of a shadow for them. Maybe on some of these houses. I didn't do too much to the houses, so I think they could stand to use a little bit. So this ship right here, let's put a little bit of a shadow at the base of it. Okay, shadows down here on the rocks, just kind of giving a little bit more weight to them. This alcohol, when you start building it up, it gets a little sticky, doesn't it? Right along the shoreline. Okay. Alright, I'm going a little nuts with this pen. I love it. It's just a little bit darker, and it's kind of a neutral gray because it's kind of temperatureless. It's really kind of adding in that little extra bit of lighting wherever I'm doing it. So if you have kind of a neutral gray, meaning temperatureless, not that it has to be temperatureless, I guess it could be a warm gray or a cool gray. Although this one's called cool gray. I don't know, it looks temperatureless to me. I don't see really much blue in it or purple or something like that. But I like it on the forms. You can even use it to add a little bit of texture. Okay. Looks pretty good, I guess. Let's grab our pens here and go in. Right around this area, it can really use some additional detail. You know, we've really kind of introduced a lot of tone into there, which looks good in terms of defining of the form, but now we can go back in and really bring in some kind of element of you know, crisp shapes in the form of these little dots. Okay, they represent kind of the crashing waves, the splashing of the waves. You're able to introduce something very light over something dark, I mean, it gives it some nice contrast down there. See that wave kind of splashing? It looks more dimensional that way. And naturally, this has to be something that's applied after the fact. I mean, I guess you can do some sort of resist, you know, where these little dots are resist and you can color over them, but you know, for the most part we are kind of adding these in after, because it's not like you can have some area of the white of the page or something like that and in the form of a little tiny dot and work color around that tiny little object. So just adding them in at this point in time. It's kind of the natural process of things. So it's kind of giving it that nice little splash down here. And in this otherwise kind of, I don't know, uninteresting area. Okay, giving it the splash, like it's, you can concentrate a little bit more, you know, in an area. And then kind of dissipate it by spacing it out somewhat. A little bit more like that, so it's heavy and then sparse, I guess, or sparser as it moves away from that area. Right along the shoreline here. You can put some little, if you feel little waves slapping these rocks. Okay. So I'm concentrating it in the lighter area, and then I move it out into the darker areas. The darker it gets, the less I use of it. There's this rock right here, and there's a lot of splashes around this one. Some other crashing waves over this way. A lot of little dots. It kind of lends itself to that. This is a really big stamp too, with a lot of crashing waves all over it. And then we have the shoreline there, so See this area right in here, it becomes fairly rich with tone, and you know, there's variation in tone, but you add this splash and overlay into it, and it becomes that much more effective, I think, you know, in terms of dimension. We're trying to create dimension with the use of shadow, but you do this overlay of a little bit of texture, and you know, it just kind of all adds to that, you know, the overall kind of look. Okay, I add it into my water as well. Maybe we wouldn't have so many highlights like that on a foggy day, but so be it. These look kind of fun, so I'm going to add them. You can add some to your different forms, like you know, some of these little rock surfaces, you know, the top sides of them, or the sides that are kind of facing the light. Things a little bit more dimensional, don't they? There's all dots, that is. Put that little highlight on things, or let's see this house right here. The light is coming from there, so if you just kind of put a little highlighting on the side of the house facing that light, you can make them stand out a little bit more. Coloring some of those. This page is really sticky with all that alcohol ink. It won't be, it's not a bad thing. I mean, when I spray it, it won't be so sticky either, but... Okay, let's take a look. I do have other values of and hue of different gel pens, okay? Maybe I can add in some blue splashes, okay, not just white. This is a blue colored scheme, so maybe some of these splashes are in the shadows and represent just darker splashing texture, okay? And sometimes it's good to have a kind of a range of those. I'm not talking a huge range, you don't need 5 colors of blue gel pen dots, but they can kind of add a nice little touch where maybe the white would be too stark white, and in contrast with I don't know what the color tone around it. So Okay. That was a very light blue. There's a color noted for that gel pen. Alright, this is my Colorbox Uniball one. It's a bigger tip gel pen than the ones that I was just using, so I want to have a little bit of variation in size of, you know, splash in some areas, so that's what this one provides. And this one's a lot more opaque, okay, so we're dealing with a lot of translucent little dots there, so you can work with different values of you know, even the smallest details in the form of these little dots to give your scene, you know, potentially nice and rich surface quality. Okay, so there's those dots out there. You can kind of see the larger ones. Okay, you can see the lighter ones down there. Hopefully you can see some of the bigger ones. Now here's what this looks like over here. You see the difference over here. Okay, so we'll do the same thing. In this area we'll add some of these more opaque little dots, little, in this case, splashes, water splashes. Coming off the crest of the wave, the spindrift. Okay, especially over here. When we'd go to the beach, my dad always said, always have one eye on the ocean. That way I wouldn't get, you know, big wave wouldn't come in and drag me out to sea. We would always go fishing and surf fishing. So you're out there in the waves, digging for sand crabs a lot, or just kind of playing around, digging a hole, you know, a shovel. You always gotta kind of take a peek behind you and make sure that some wave doesn't come in and, you know, first of all get you soaked, you know, but also as a safety measure. People get dragged out all the time, that kind of taking it for granted, their safety. Okay, so here we go. A little crazy down that way. Some more splashes over there. Okay, so that kind of brought things to life a little bit. The gel pen work, the highlights. Alright, let's hit this area with quite a bit of pigment ink. Okay, I'm going to use my Stylus Tool, and it still has some pigment ink in from, I think it was yesterday. And it doesn't dry out so fast, you know, that I can't use it again. So let's bring in the fog. Let's have some nice rolling fog. And I don't think I'm going to be too conservative with this. I used a pretty big slathering in this area to give this type of look. I can probably put a little bit more of that. I stamped some additional trees in here. after I did that video. I thought, I could use a little bit more. Okay. Applying this down. This is a Colorbox Frost White, and I'm using a very dry pad here, so when I tap this in there, I'm not getting as much as you might think, okay? Most of my pads are really, really juicy with ink, okay? This one just happens to be very, very dry, so there's a lot of control over it, okay? So I don't know if you can see, there's a slight change in hue here, or value, rather. Okay, you can see where it's kind of obscuring that ship there by bringing in some of this tone. But where I really want to add quite a good deal of this is this transition between sky and surface here. Where you almost can't tell where the land ends and the sky begins. Okay, taking on a little bit of a haze, especially you can see where I've placed it on the ship. I'll put a little bit more on the sails right here. Heading out into the great unknown. And in this case, peril. Okay, now why not bring in some of this texture down here? Well, let's see if I can add that in with this. Normally I do it with a little Q-tip, but let's do it a little bit with this, okay? Just adding a little bit at a time, okay? And a very dry brush touch. Even in this big wand here, I have so little on here I can barely see it, so and get it up a little bit more. Here we go. This rock, if I want it a little bit more diffused in that ocean spray, I can kind of add some of this down. Don't add it everywhere, kind of a little bit of a oscillation between application and nothing. Otherwise it looks too kind of it's too much, you know. You want this to be an interplay of textures, I think, for the best results. Unless just the whole thing is fogged in, that's what you're going after. And I've done that before once or twice. But usually not. Okay, kind of adding some of it down here and there. You can see it right over here where it's been added on that rock, but not on the top of the rock. Over here it becomes a little bit more kind of foggier. See these rocks over here? I mean, these look okay, but let's just kind of add a little bit on, you know, maybe one side of them. And in my opinion, they become a little bit more dimensional looking, like that. Okay, see it's a little bit lighter on that side. And I put a little bit up here too. Okay, like that. See over here? I mean, this area over here looks pretty good to me, but let's add a little bit of this in here. Like that. you get that? Okay, see it. That's a little bit too defined. Let me try to blend that out. Oops, I'm getting my shape of my wand showing there a little bit. Here, let me mask that off. I might have to use a Q-tip right in there. I don't know. Looks okay. So that kind of added a little bit of fog over in this area right there, and it creates a little separation between this foreground rock and that background. Okay. At the base of some of these right here, we can put a little bit of creeping fog. Let's do something. Let's mask off a little bit of one of these rocks like that. And I'll add a little bit of this mist right there. See that? Creates a little bit of a different texture and value. Just right in there. Okay, see it's a little bit different. And then if you do it again in another area, it'll just vary it a little bit. You know, you get this little sharp, diffused type of interplay going on. Like that. So it's a little bit more diffused, a little bit of that. I don't know, this isn't the ideal thing. Q-tip's easier, I think, to get in there. But let's get in right over here to this side. And this ink, pigment ink, does dry a lot darker than how it looks right after it's applied, so if you want it to look how it looks after you've applied it, you have to kind of go for multiple coats, or you can just go on up to the something like a Brilliance or a different ink that's a little bit more opaque. Let me use my Q-tip here just to kind of hit a more specific area. A little bit at the around the ship. If you want it kind of going off into some heavier fog, then you have to use a heavier application of pigment ink. So I'll go to my Hero Hues. It's a pigment ink that's a little bit more opaque. Way too opaque. It does dry a lot darker though than it looks when you apply it. I don't know, especially maybe because it looks so much lighter when you apply it. It just seems to dry a lot darker than the Colorbox one, but like I said, maybe it's from just for the fact that it looks so light. when you first apply it. So doing something like that is not bad because, like I said, it'll, you know, you have to kind of wait for it to dry and see what it looks like. Okay, something like that. We can add a little bit more down here. Kind of creates a nice color glow. Or value glow, I guess actually not really a color glow. Boy, that's a lot. Okay, so something like that. I've used a lot up here in the Colorbox Frost White. Let's do the same thing with some of this here, okay? A little bit more of the obscuring of the horizon line. There we go. I don't know if you can tell, but it got a little bit lighter in there. Let's put some more of this on this ocean surface too. I want to get rid of some of the, not get rid of, but obscure some of those fine, you know, or streaks in there. I'll just knock them down a touch in terms of value. Although they're light, but I want them even lighter. There we have it, I think. Trying to decide if I want any more of this. Maybe around these houses. I'll put the end one into a little bit more of a kind of foggy haze, subtle haze. Alright, so that is that. I'm trying to decide if I want anything more on here. Could always do some little bit more foreground. Down here, maybe some beach grass or something. Versifying black. Maybe not too much beach grass, but because it is a rocky shore, so. But actually, I can see some grass on the rocky waterside, so just following suit with some of this. Light even pressure. Okay. See, I'm kind of holding steady. Light even pressure. Don't do it so fast, otherwise you'll get kind of a blur, maybe. So you get something like that. A little bit more dimension. Doing this in VersaFine, it'll take a little bit longer to dry, but that's okay because I'm kind of done with the composition now. And this is, you know, like the final touch. So I can just let this dry for as long as it needs to be. Or as long as it needs to dry. Alright, so the final touches there. That kind of foreground going in here. And we have our opening scene. Heading off into the new world. Unbeknownst to them, tragedy strikes, and I'll do my third piece, which will be tropical island or whatever. And I was thinking, I wasn't going to use that ship in the third one, but I was thinking about having it kind of just coming out of the water, you know, a couple of the masts or something like that, or I don't know, the hull, I don't know, something like that. And that will be my, you know, the object that creates that continuity between the three scenes, you know, besides the elongated format like that. So I don't know, not kind of undecided as far as what I want to do with that, but I don't know, I guess the seaside, you know, the water can be the continuity too. Although it's, I don't know, this one's like a completely different character than that middle spread with all the turbulence and kind of the energy of it. But I don't know, I'll figure it out. Okay, so thanks for watching. And for me, completely different experience than that previous spread, but equally as fun, and it's kind of fun putting together some sort of sequence together, you know, related in terms of a storyline. So fun stuff. Okay, thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning into the channel.